Today on Historical Moments we're tackling one of the most fascinating questions from the post-World War II era. Why did Germany get split in half? It's a story involving the world's biggest superpowers, some serious mistrust, and decisions made in the rubble of a devastated continent that would shape global politics for nearly half a century. So let's figure out how we went from defeating Nazi Germany together to building a concrete wall through the heart of Europe. To understand the split, we need to rewind to before the war even ended. By 1943 and 1944, it was pretty clear the Allies were going to win. The question wasn't if Germany would be defeated, but what on earth do we do with it afterwards? The big three, Franklin Roosevelt, Winston Churchill and Joseph Stalin, met at several conferences to hammer this out. The most important were Yalta in February 1945 and Potsdam in July and August of that same year. At Yalta, with Germany still fighting, they agreed on the basic framework. Germany would be divided into occupation zones. The Soviet Union would control the east, the United States would take the south, Britain would handle the northwest, and France, added later, would get a slice carved out of the American and British zones in the west and southwest. Now, here's the thing, that was supposed to be temporary. The idea was that the Allies would occupy Germany, demilitarize it, purge it of Nazi influence, and eventually allow it to reunify as a peaceful democratic nation. Berlin, stuck deep into the Soviet zone, would also be divided into 4 sectors because it was the capital and everyone wanted a peace. Sounds reasonable, but here's where it gets complicated. The alliance that won the war was always a bit awkward. You had the Western democracies, the US and Britain, teaming up with the Soviet Union, a communist dictatorship. They had a common enemy in Hitler, but very different visions for what the world should look like after the fighting stopped. Stalin wanted security. The Soviet Union had been invaded twice in 30 years, first in World War I, then by Nazi Germany in 1941. Millions of Soviet citizens died. Stalin's priority was making sure that never happened again, which meant he wanted friendly, or more accurately, controlled governments in Eastern Europe as a buffer zone. The Western Allies, meanwhile, wanted to rebuild Germany as a stable, prosperous democracy integrated into the European economy. They believed that the harsh treatment of Germany after World War I, massive reparations, territorial losses, economic collapse, had helped create the conditions for Hitler's rise. They didn't want to repeat that mistake. The Soviets, on the other hand, wanted to strip Germany of its industrial capacity and extract heavy reparations. Remember, the Germans had devastated the Soviet Union. Stalin felt entitled to compensation, and he wasn't particularly worried about Germany's feelings on the matter. By 1947 and 48, the temporary occupation zones were starting to look pretty permanent. The Western zones began coordinating their policies, merging their economies, and in June 1948 they introduced a new currency, the Deutsche Mark, to establish the economy and combat inflation. Stalin saw this as a direct threat. A strong, unified West Germany, aligned with the United States and Britain, was exactly what he didn't want. So he made a bold move, the Berlin Blockade. In June 1948, Soviet forces cut off all road, rail and canal access to West Berlin. Berlin was deep inside the Soviet zone, so the western sectors of the city were like an island in the Soviet Sea. Stalin was essentially holding West Berlin hostage, trying to force the Western Allies out. The Western response was remarkable, the Berlin Airlift. For nearly a year, American and British planes flew supplies into West Berlin around the clock. At its peak, planes were landing every few minutes bringing in food, coal, medicine, everything needed to keep over 2 million people alive. It was a massive logistical achievement and a huge propaganda victory. Stalin eventually lifted the blockade in May 1949, but the damage to East-West relations was done. By 1949, both sides accepted reality and made it official. In May, the Western zones became the Federal Republic of Germany, West Germany, with its capital in Bonn. It was a parliamentary democracy aligned with the West, and it would eventually join NATO in 1955. In October 1949, the Soviet zone became the German Democratic Republic, East Germany, with its capital in East Berlin. Despite the name, there was nothing particularly democratic about it. It was a one-party communist state controlled by the Socialist Unity Party, which took its orders from Moscow. And there you have it, one country became two. West Germany embraced capitalism and democracy. East Germany got central planning and authoritarianism. The Iron Curtain, as Churchill called it, had descended across Europe, and Germany was split right down the middle. For the next decade, the border between East and West hardened, but Berlin remained a weak point. People could still move relatively freely between the sectors of the city, and guess what? They did. In droves. From 1941 to 61, about 2.5 million East Germans fled to the west, many through Berlin. These weren't just random people, they were often young, educated, skilled workers. East Germany was hemorrhaging its future. On the night of August 12, 1961, East German soldiers began stringing barbed wire across the city. Within days they started building a concrete wall. Families were separated overnight. People who'd gone to work in one sector couldn't get home to the other. The Berlin Wall became the ultimate symbol of the Cold War, a literal physical barrier between two ideas. The wall would stand for 28 years, becoming more sophisticated over time, with guard towers, death strips and dogs. At least 140 people died trying to cross it. So why was Germany split after World War II? The simple answer is, the Allies couldn't agree on what to do with it. The deeper answer is that the split reflected a fundamental divide in how the Soviet Union and Western powers viewed security, democracy, and the post-war world order. What started as a temporary military occupation hardened into a permanent political division because of the Cold War. Germany became the front line of that conflict, and Germans paid the price for nearly 50 years. This story, however, has a happy ending. The Berlin Wall fell in November 1989, and Germany officially reunified on October 3, 1990. Today, it is Europe's largest economy and a cornerstone of the European Union. Not bad for a country that was literally torn in two. Thanks for listening, everybody. If you enjoy this episode, please like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.